I mean, one of the fascinating things about Tel Aviv last night was that as soon as this news came out, it was a bit like Israel had won the World Cup final in football. I mean, the streets started filling with cars and flags, and there was this sense of like clenched fists, pumping the air, relief and exhilaration.
Evil has suffered a heavy blow, but our task has not been completed. Those are the words of Benjamin Netanyahu as he vowed the war in Gaza will continue despite the killing of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader who coordinated the October the 7th attacks. The Israeli Prime Minister says the fighting will continue until the remaining hostages held in Gaza are brought home.
This is an important moment in the war. We will continue with all our strength until the return home of all of your loved ones, who are our loved ones. This is our highest commitment. This is my highest commitment. I call on everyone who holds our hostages. Whoever lays down his weapon and return our hostages, we will allow him to go out and leave. And in the same way I say, whoever harm our hostages, blood on his head, we will reckon with him.
That's Benjamin Netanyahu, his words translated. As soon as the news of Sinwar's death was announced, people took to the streets of Tel Aviv. Many were celebrating, others were more cautious.
It's kind of a closure, but it's like it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change a lot.
It's dangerous for our safety, like what Israel does and how it reacts to things that is coming for it. But also, we look at it in a more technical way, as if there's more to it. There's more like, okay, now we need to be careful of a counterattack, you know, like we need to be afraid.
I'm going to summarize it and say we're not feeling like we're winning. Like, oh, the 7th of October never happened because we killed him. No, it's just like,
it's not a
the
win.
7th of October did happen. Okay, we already lost.
I don't think it's a very good thing that people celebrate like death. Like, I have no problem with him dying. I'm more happy than not. If like, I prefer to people to celebrate way more when like hostages come back. But I can understand, you know, it's been tough for the Israeli people in many ways, and people just look for some kind of hope.
Well, the Sunday Times reporter Will Lloyd joins us this morning from Tel Aviv. Will, good morning.
Good morning, Callum. Hello.
I'm just intrigued by those people that you were speaking to in Tel Aviv last night who actually seem a lot more cautious about what this means than perhaps I was expecting.
Well, it's worth remembering that Israel carried out its first official assassination of a foreign enemy in 1956. It was an Egyptian colonel. So there is a deep history here of Israel taking out people who are enemies of the state, and then wars with those enemies continuing in a pretty bloody and destructive fashion for decades later. And I think all Israelis, or most Israelis, know that. I mean, one of the fascinating things about Tel Aviv last night was that as soon as this news came out, it was a bit like Israel had won the World Cup final in football. I mean, the streets started filling with cars and flags, and there was this sense of like clenched fists, pumping the air, relief and exhilaration. Definitely, that is definitely a big thing that happened here last night. But at the same time, as I said, Israel fights a lot of wars, and people are cautious about getting too excited about this. And again, there are 96 hostages, whether they're dead or alive, still in Gaza, and October the 7th still happened. That was still something that affected almost everybody here. And I think those two factors really play into the way people have reacted to all of the news this year. I mean, there's so much news here. There's a sort of unstoppable deluge of news in Israel. And one thing that really stands out when you speak to people, is some people anyway, is that there's a numbness now. People are quite numb to these developments because there's just so many of them.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I wonder how much of that is because of caution around how Prime Minister Netanyahu deals with these situations. Opinion polling suggests he is not popular, in a kind of across Israel, and certainly that the ambition here is to get the hostages home, which is something he was balancing, I think, in his messaging as well. But I just wonder if that is the underpinning issue here, is that nobody quite knows how to view Netanyahu.
Well, in a city like Tel Aviv, he's a combination of sort of Boris Johnson, Satan, Lucifer, and every other golem from history. But I would also be quite cautious, because I think a lot of the reporting from all English-speaking media organizations about Israel does tend to rely on people like me speaking to people who speak English, whereas there's a very large constituency in Israel, not really in Tel Aviv, but elsewhere, of Hebrew-speaking people who don't speak English, Israelis, who think Netanyahu is a wonderful champion for the Jewish state, and he has had a bit of an uptick in popularity, particularly since June, as this war, the way we look at this war has started to change, and we can start to perhaps say that on the battlefield, with unbelievable extortionate costs in human life, and the destruction of whole cities, which is actually a new thing in Israel's conflicts. I mean, the destruction of cities in Gaza is something very new that hasn't happened before. But even all that being said, Netanyahu is slightly more popular now. But Israel has always said that Sinwar was a block to any ceasefire and hostage release deal, and now he's not there. So this obstacle has been removed, and I think there will be some expectation now, particularly at the most sort of personal front of this, which is the hostage families, the people who still have their loved ones in Gaza. They will expect now something to move, and will that happen? We don't know.
Yeah, something to move, because there has been some element of gridlock, hasn't there, in talks. Hamas have kind of refused to engage beyond where things had got to kind of over the summer, really, and things have been in this holding pattern. Then we've got Iran factored into this as well, and whether Israel is planning strikes against Iran and retaliation, and it's just this kind of permanent state of what is going to happen next, and nobody can quite explain that, and not for the first time, Will.
Absolutely. And so I think we have to go back slightly and think about one of the most enduring and fascinating mysteries about Sinwar now that he's been killed, which is when he planned October the 7th alongside his colleagues in Hamas, what did they actually expect to happen? Did they think, were they pragmatic strategists who thought that if they kidnapped enough Israelis, Israel would be quite sort of human rightsy and make a big deal with them, and the Iranians would support Gaza and Hezbollah would support Gaza far more than both of those groups have? Or was Sinwar a fanatical religious fundamentalist? Remember, he was in the Hamas morality police in Palestine in the 1980s. Was he somebody who thought, if we attack Israel like this, we can start a conflagration that will ultimately destroy the state of Israel? Now, we don't really know yet what Sinwar was thinking. It's worth, if you can stomach it, trying to seek out the footage an Israeli drone took of his last moments. He is scurrying around in a very damaged building, and he throws a block of wood at the Israeli drone that's following him. And the Iranians have come out and said this shows, this is a martyr, this is a man, this is a guy who died with his chest out. But the thing that really struck me was not really watching what Sinwar did in his last moments, but look at where he was. I mean, he was in a wreck of a building. There were wrecks of buildings outside him. And he has contributed into turning Gaza into the most sort of absurd area of human suffering and destruction. And I think that is also worth, there's a lot of, we'll be talking about Biden and Bibi and deals and what happens in the American election, but look at that destruction and think about what's happened in Gaza in the last year. It was unthinkable, really, before this.
Yeah. Will, thank you so much. Thank you for speaking to us this morning, and brilliant reporting, as always, for us and for the paper as well. Will Lloyd reporting from Tel Aviv.